Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead, it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
It's podcast night in America, and you're locked and loaded with the Fantasy Football Hustle. How we doing out there, everybody? It's Brian Drake from FightingChanceFantasy.com, joined as always by that man you came to listen to, the sweet sounds of FootballGuys.com writer Dwain McFarland. Dwain, what's going on out there? And I've got to start by asking, what kind of response have you gotten to the draft plan show, which thank you, everyone, made it our largest download show to date. It was incredible, the response that I got. Dwain, what were people saying to you?
Man, it's been great. Like, the feedback has been, it's the most feedback unsolicited that I've gotten, on any show that we've done. Also, a lot of people are thinking about fantasy right now, but I had multiple folks literally telling me, I never really understood what roster construction meant until you guys did that show. And I had people literally tell me, I've never listened to a show like that anywhere before. I can't get that information anywhere. So that's awesome. Who knows if who knows what all podcasts are out there? There's a lot of really quality people, in this industry. But I know, for one, that's something that, as someone that's played, in a lot of mid stakes and high stakes type tournament stuff, it's a big differentiator between the average player and the non-average player. And so just being able to share, lessons learned for those folks that may not have heard those things before. People take those things to heart. I promise it's going to make them a lot better at fantasy football come this season.
If you didn't listen to the show, go back in our archives. It's called the Draft Plan episode. It's about 90 minutes of just in-depth fantasy talk. Dwain walking you through his tiers, who to draft in each position. If you're in the front of the draft, middle of the draft, end of the draft, I promise you it will make you draft a better roster this weekend. This show tonight is going to be kind of like an addendum to that, a little update as things we've seen through week 2 of the preseason. Other stuff we're going to cover tonight. I headed out to the Kings Classic this past weekend in Canton, Ohio. Got to do a really fun draft with a bunch of smart fellas from the industry at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Thanks to Bob Long and Brad Evans for having me out there. What a blast. And speaking of blast, I was put on blast by our guys, Joe Dolan and Matt Camp from SiriusXM, over passing on Michael Thomas, the Saints wide receiver, in round 2 of a 14-team PPR. I'll get into why I did it. Did I still know he was on the board? Maybe, maybe not. But I'll get into my reasons why I passed on him there. A new segment tonight called Who's Trolling Dwain? But the main thing we're going to do here is we're going to look at guys who are moving up and down Dwain's draft board. Maybe there's some guys holding steady. Maybe there's some guys he thinks you should take a round or two early. But we're going to take a good look at everything going on out there in the NFL. And let's start, Dwain, at the quarterback position and guys who are moving up the board. And you've got Andrew Luck on there.
Yeah, and actually Andrew Luck's supposed to be down, so that's my bad on the show notes.
You killed me right off the bat. I thought so.
I just wanted to get it out of the way. No, Luck is down. And just before we jump into this, just to kind of give everybody an understanding of where this is coming from. So, if you're not following me on Twitter at Dwain McFarland, I'm putting out this content pretty much every day around. I'm watching every snap that these teams are playing multiple times when their starters are on the field. So I'm telling you what are the personnel group trends we're seeing. I'm telling you if I think it matters very much or not, because some teams it matters more than others. So my eyes are basically bleeding, Drake. I mean, I've been watching film for like 2 days straight. So, and keeping these notes and trying to get people up to speed. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is from week 2 of the preseason and what I saw, but it's taking it in context of what are the trends we saw in week 1. Did they play their starters week 1? Not. Like I said, each week's a little different for each team. So there's a lot of reading in between the lines. You also want to understand what's been going on in camp. But the more you start to pair together this information and put all the data points together, you start to get this holistic picture. And so that's really what the basis of this is tonight. And so just starting off with Andrew Luck, And if you want, I mean, we can just hit, this is one where we've kind of got a few people from the team. So you tell me how you want to do it. But Andrew Luck, just the big thing, everybody knows, that Andrew Luck is dealing, with an injury. The thing that's got me the most scared on this, Drake, I'll keep it real simple, is the Colts just really don't know for sure what's going on. They've said they think they know. Well, if they think they know what's going on, that means they also think they know they have the right, recovery program in place, which means they think they may know what his timeline is. There's just a lot of unknowns for Andrew Luck. We know that whenever he went out to practice, most recently and tried to, get through a practice, he couldn't. He's a competitor, but he's shutting it down. He doesn't want to deal with a calf or some sort of leg injury that ultimately puts his shoulder at risk. So the way I look at it right now is I've taken 4 games off of Andrew Luck, where we sit right now, just because this is such a gloomy, lurky, it's just muddy, right? We just don't know for sure what's going on, but it's not good. So you can tell me how you want to go from there.
ADP on Andrew Luck from the FFWC has him going off the board as QB6. I should mention also, since we do use fulltimefantasy.com, ADP from the FFWC, we are proud members of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Want to get the plug in, as we're contractually obligated to do. Get that out of the way. So Luck's a guy who I think is going to be tumbling down draft boards these next 2 weeks. Let me just quickly get your read on Jacoby Brissett and what he would do to this offense. Is there a chance in a 2 QB league you draft Jacoby Brissett?
There's no way.
Okay.
And I watched every snap from Brissett. Here's what I'll say. He's a functional quarterback, but he's going to hurt everybody. He does not have the accuracy to lead receivers and help gain rack yards. He's not near as good, on the deep ball as Luck. He does not process information the same way that Andrew Luck does. And that's no big knock on Jacoby Brissett. Andrew Luck's one of the better quarterbacks in the league, right? So it's not like this is a surprise. But this takes T.Y. Hilton down. This takes Eric Ebron down. This pushes all of your Colts down the draft board. We'll talk about Marlon Mack in a minute, but for me, I think the actionable information that folks want to hear, I've moved Andrew Luck into my 4th tier, Drake. Like I'm not taking him ahead of Baker Mayfield, Deshaun Watson, Carson Wentz, Aaron Rodgers. I'm not taking him ahead of Matt Ryan. I'm not taking him even ahead of Cam Newton right now. I've got him right in the tier with Winston, Wilson, Breeze, Gotham, and that's it, plus Andrew Luck, because I've got 4 games off of him. And I just there's no reason to try to force it with Andrew Luck. There's so many good quarterbacks this year, and with the uncertainty of it, we may change this next week if all of a sudden he comes out and he's practicing. It just doesn't seem like it's very likely, though. They don't even know if he's going to be ready for week 1. And the more I've read about this, I'm truly concerned about it, and there's just no reason to force it.
Let me talk about another quarterback you're down on, and that's Kyler Murray. Kind of came back to earth this week, 3 of 8 for 12 yards, had a couple of penalties for simulating a snap by fake clapping, took a bad safety. It wasn't good for the Heisman Trophy winner out there in Arizona. What did you see, and how is this going to affect where you're taking him? I think it's going to drive his ADP down, which I like because I'd like him as a backup, but I don't want him as my frontline quarterback.
Right. I mean, and Murray's ADP had just gotten out of hand. A lot of people in the industry, got really excited about Cliff Kingsbury, and we all did. We wanted to be excited about it. But what's funny is when I started my projection process, I was really down on the Cardinals. And it's funny is I'm coming full circle. The reason I was down on them is I didn't like their offensive line. I didn't like the fact they had a rookie quarterback. I didn't like the fact that really they don't have any elite receivers. They've got a very shaky core of pass catchers, period. We've got Larry Fitzgerald. Yes, he's going to be a Hall of Famer, but he's very old. They're asking him to play more outside, some inside. Christian Kirk, there's a lot on that guy's plate. I like Christian Kirk, but to think for us just to assume he can step up and carry the load, and really help this passing offense, I just think there's a lot of assumptions. So with all of that, now you pair that with Kyler Murray's play, if you look back to, the bowl game against Alabama, whenever they were putting the pressure on Kyler Murray before in the second half, when they just totally let the foot off the gas and just were basically playing to keep a lead, and Murray got going again, when they were confusing him with post-read coverage changes and things like that, he really struggled. So he's facing some of those things now in the NFL. So he's going to have to grow. And the other thing that I saw, Drake, with this pressure and with what's going on is he's just overthrowing guys. He overthrew Christian Kirk 3 times. I mean, just overthrew it over his head. And same thing with Larry Fitzgerald. So it's just a combination of everything for me with Kyler Murray. I never had him inside of my top 12 quarterbacks, like some folks, but I think we have to mention him because he has been so pumped up. It's really, folks are going to have to tap the brakes. And people will say, Drake, preseason doesn't matter. They'll say, oh, they're not showing anything. They're installing their offense. What they are running right now are the base concepts of air raid. If they can't do those, layering different punches, counter punches on top of that to offset what defenses are thinking, that becomes even harder. This is their foundation. If we're talking about an offense that's not installing, and they're just trying to get through the preseason without injury, that's one thing. That's not what's going on with the Cardinals. They're trying to play guys. They're trying to get the building blocks for their season, their foundation established, and it's not going well. This is not a good time for this to be going on. So for me, with Kyler Murray, he's definitely downgraded. I wouldn't take him over Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers. If you're going to take him over those guys, that's fine because you can grab one of those guys afterwards to pair with him. If you just think he carries the upside, that's fine. But just don't reach on Murray.
You want to talk about reaching. His FFWC ADP is QB5.
That's stupid.
Crazy.
There's no other way to put it. It's stupid.
Let's talk about a guy who's moving up the boards in your world, and that's Sam Darnold. He's looking pretty sharp out there. In his first preseason game, he was 4 of 5 for 68 yards and a touchdown. This past weekend, he comes back. He's 5 of 7 for 46 yards against the Falcons. Everybody's talking up Sammy Darnold. He's got some nice weapons out there. He'll get Chris Herndon back after his suspension. You can get him for a song late in the draft. So it might maybe a nice dart throw on Sam Darnold as your QB2.
Yeah, just another example of why you don't need to draft a quarterback early. I mean, Sam Darnold looks really good. Here's the thing. He will have 3 really good passing options available to him on every play. On some plays, it will be 5 once he has Chris Herndon back. Let's think about it. You've got Jamison Crowder, who's going to now work those interior crossers and little sit-down routes, the seams. Crowder, just a few years ago, was everybody loved Jamison Crowder, going to take him in the 7th, 8th round of drafts. Jamison Crowder. Now, he's chopped liver, right? He's a 12th, 13th round pick. So he's a good player. Quincy Enunwa, who they gave a decent contract, right, last year, is a really good Z receiver. He's the guy that's going to work, the underneath and intermediate stuff from outside. He's very physical. Then you have Robbie Anderson, right, who can take the top off of the defense. We'll talk about him some more here in a minute. You got Le'Veon Bell, who can now work right around the line of scrimmage. And then Chris Herndon, once he gets back, is another guy that can work the seam. So Darnold just has really good complementary weapons that all can work different areas of the field and can create some sort of mismatch no matter who their opponent is. And with the upgrades they've made to offensive line, he should have more time than last year. He's processing things more quickly. So Sam Darnold is just a guy that, what you said, if you get him as your QB2, I really don't mind it. I've got him now. I've moved him up ahead of Jimmy Garoppolo, Matthew Stafford, and even Tom Brady. And he's above Josh Allen. I've got him up there with the Lamar Jackson, Mitch Trubisky tier of players and Kyler Murray. The only reason those guys are even in his tier is because of their rushing ability. As a passer, Sam Darnold's better than all of those guys.
QB 22 from FFWC ADP. We're going to move it over to the running back position now. And guys that are moving up your draft board, the first guy you mentioned to me is Tony Pollard. So you're in Big D. You were close to the Cowboys. Jerry's coming out and saying this guy could carry the load. And in his last game, 5 for 42 and a touchdown. This guy's got 9th round ADP right now. What's going on with Tony Pollard? We don't know anything with Zeke yet. Give me this in 2 parts. Number 1, where would you take him if there's no Zeke? And secondly, if Zeke comes back, does he have kind of standalone value?
Yeah, so first part, we're just not going to know for sure on Zeke, but he's worth a 9th, 10th round pick. I don't own any back more than I own Tony Pollard besides Alexander Mattison. Alexander Madison's my most owned player. We talked about him last week on the draft plan. My second most owned running back is Tony Pollard. Now his price has gone up significantly, but he's still not priced out of what his value could be. Because right now, this thing between Jerry and Zeke, a lot of it could be positioning for a contract, et cetera. But at the same time, you know how it goes, Drake. Feelings get hurt. Heels get dug in. People want to, all of a sudden things go from, I'll hold out a little bit and just, see if I can get me a little bit of money added onto this year, to now you're potentially in this standoff scenario, right? And for me, even if Zeke comes back week 1, it's worth the risk on Tony Pollard to take him in the 9th or 10th round, especially if you went receiver early. You know how we talked about with folks last week, Drake, at the end of the draft, you're at the end of round 1. Maybe you start off Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyreek Hill. Then you're going to have to come back and stabilize with like a Chris Carson. Then maybe you grab an Eckler and a Duke Johnson. Man, the perfect 4th name to put with that roster is freaking Tony Pollard. Because if you hit on it and you've got those receivers to go with Tony Pollard, it could be a league winner. Pollard looked great. He's a good zone runner. The Cowboys run a ton of inside zone. He showed patience. He showed vision. He can run routes. He's a mismatch. They've shown him, getting open against Van Der Esch, against the new $65 million man, Jalen Smith. I mean, he's been playing against all of these good linebackers and safeties in camp and repeatedly getting open against them because he's a good route runner. He's a good receiver. Guy went, played against the Rams last week, and if you didn't know better, you would have thought Tony Pollard was the guy drafted ahead of Darrell Henderson, right? Now, a lot of that's to do with he plays for the Cowboys. They had their starting offensive line in. The Rams had their second-team defense. So some of his efficiency ties back to that, but he looked really good, and he's going to play behind one of the best 3 offensive lines and on a team that wants to run the ball, and he's going to catch passes. He could easily be an RB2, RB1 if Zeke sits out. Now, does he have standalone value? I don't think he'll have a lot just because the Cowboys, they don't pass the ball a ton. They don't run a high volume of plays either. I do think it does hurt Zeke's value a little bit, but not enough that if we find out tomorrow Zeke's playing, Zeke should still be a top 4 pick. But Pollard could be just enough that now Zeke doesn't have, that 70, 80 catch ceiling. It might be more like 50 catch ceiling, because Pollard could catch 20, 30 balls. So Pollard's still a guy to roster though, Drake, even if we find out that Zeke comes back, because he's clearly the number 2 now. So now we know who the handcuff is. So the positive that comes out of this, even if Zeke comes back tomorrow, is Pollard had his chance to establish himself, and he should still. So if that happens, Drake, he should still be going in rounds 13, 14, 12, the range where if you know who the handcuff is for an elite bell cow back behind a good offensive line, you take them. That's where Pollard will still fit.
And let me just add this. How many times have we seen a guy sit out training camp, come back, and he's away from the team for 2 months or whatever, and the soft tissue injuries pile up? Those happen all the time. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Zeke. Just put it in your back pocket when you're drafting Tony Pollard. I could totally see something like that happening. Yeah, next 2 guys we're going to talk about here are a couple of handcuffs who are moving up in the world. Let's start with Malcolm Brown with the Rams. He's got a 14th round ADP. Everyone's all over Darrell Henderson, but you're higher on Mr. Brown.
Well, I'm not necessarily higher on Brown, but what we're not seeing is what's telling right now. So the Rams have been sitting their starters these last 2 weeks, meaning Gurley isn't out there, Cooper Kupp, Brandon Cooks, Jared Goff. All these guys have been sitting. Darrell Henderson's been playing. Guess who they haven't suited up? Malcolm Brown. So he's just a guy I want to mention to people. It's not he needs to rush up your board, but you need to he fits into the thing we just talked about. If Zeke were to come back tomorrow, what Tony Pollard means. He'll be a little later because he is going to share that with Darrell Henderson. But at the same time, this is kind of telling to me that they're not playing the guy right now. That means that they really probably consider him to be, if Gurley goes down, he's our guy. Now, Darrell Henderson's going to get his work, but Henderson, we can go ahead and talk about him. He's one of the guys I have on the list as holding steady. Last week, we talked about him potentially going down some just because he's struggling to run the ball in zone, Drake, and he still is. If he's running power, which means like a pulling guard, a toss play, something where he knows where it's going and he's following a blocker very closely, and then he makes one cut, and he can accelerate, use that great contact balance. Darrell Henderson is a monster in those scenarios, and he's even done that this preseason. But when he's being asked to run zone, which requires more vision, more processing of multiple levels of the defense, to set things up, it's more of a chess game, he's really struggling. In fact, this last week, I don't have it right in front of me, but the week before, I want to say he had 4 carries for -1 on zone. I think this past week he had 4 carries for like 2 yards until the last drive of the half, where they did put him in for the 2-minute drill. That's positive because he did catch the ball really well in the game. He caught a wheel route that was great. But from a rushing standpoint, he didn't do anything until the second team Cowboys defense was in there. And, oh, by the way, it was a 2-minute drill, so the Cowboys were really protecting against pass. Now, those 2 runs were zone, so that's good. I want to say those 2 carries to start off the 2-minute drill were for 14 yards. And one was inside zone, one was outside zone, and he read those really well. So that was positive. So I'm just putting him in the holding steady. But Darrell Henderson is a guy that I want to continue to monitor. We'll report back on him. We'll see how he's progressing. It looks real shaky with zone blocking right now.
Dwayne, do you hear that noise?
No, what's the noise?
That's that train coming down the track. And it's the Darwin Thompson hype train. Choo-choo! And it is way out of the station and down the track. Everybody in the world right now is saying you can't leave your draft without Darwin Thompson. Everyone's just saying at this point, Carlos Hyde's is not even making the team. Let's just anoint Darwin Thompson. He's the new man. Forget Damian Williams. He's going to take over for him in like week 4. You're moving up you're higher on him than you were a week ago. So he averaged 7.5 yards a carry against Dallas. The guy's looking good out there.
Yeah, that's the main thing with him. You're looking at different things in the preseason. And one thing you really don't want to overrate is just a performance against, a bunch of second and third teamers. But he looks above and beyond, right, what you would really expect. And it's 2 weeks in a row. So you just have to take notice because the coaches are going to notice. Carlos Hyde still got the second series last week, but you know what Carlos Hyde did? He fumbled. Mm-hmm. Carlos Hyde didn't look bad on his carries. There's a narrative where people are like, oh, Carlos Hyde just sucks now. Yeah, Carlos Hyde isn't as good as he was when he was a rookie, but if you go watch his carries, they weren't terrible. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. He gained positive yards. He did his thing, but he fumbled the ball. So Hyde's just leaving the door open. And I think what's happened at a minimum right now is Thompson has forced his way into getting some of these carries. And if for some reason Hyde were to be cut or say Damian Williams got hurt, I think Thompson has played good enough that he forces probably a bigger committee than we would have thought, a month and a half ago, right? When we're thinking about Carlos Hyde as being the handcuff to Damian Williams. So for me, the flip side of this is it moves Carlos Hyde down because even if Damian Williams, for whatever reason, something happens with him, I just don't think Hyde's going to be the clear runaway guy with the carries now. I think they're going to really get Darwin Thompson involved. And who knows, Darwin Thompson, within a few weeks of, that committee, he could overtake Carlos Hyde. So I like Darwin Thompson as a late round pick. He fits right in with the guys we're talking about. Malcolm Brown, Darwin Thompson, Tony Pollard. Even if Zeke comes back, these are guys that are great to put on your bench because they play in great offenses, right? And these are guys that have, they're showing things in the preseason. There's good vibes around them. So they're guys that you should think about rostering late.
The next guy you have up is Josh Jacobs. Haven't seen much of him in the preseason, 4 for 21 in his debut. If you're watching Hard Knocks, I'm sure you've seen more of him, but I don't pay for HBO, so I got to wait till it comes out on the free station. What do you see from Mr. Jacobs?
Man, he played really good, Drake. I mean, he's so patient. So the things Darrell Henderson doesn't do, he does all of them. He can play power. He can play zone. I mean, the guy he's a natural running back. Does he have long speed? No. But man, you just got to go watch his carries from this game, Drake. He's just one of those guys. He kind of creeps up to the line. It looks like there's nothing there. And all of a sudden he just sneaks through and gets low and it's 7 yards. 7 yards, 7 yards. He's got his vision is really good. He's a strong player. He nearly popped one of those. I mean, he nearly squeaked out the other side, and all he had was the safety left. I really would have loved to have seen that because he's a solid open field runner because he has a blend of I can either run over you or I can make a move. But, he's a guy that he should be the top rookie runner taken in drafts, and he's just cementing that in my mind. The other thing that I wanted to say is the Raiders' offensive line looked good. They were blocking really well, for him in that game, and they had their starters out there. So It just cements, Josh Jacobs. It's not so much that he's just shooting way up, but he's a guy that had started to fall in some people's minds. But I think he's easily worth, an early 4th round pick right now.
Let's talk about some running backs that might be moving down your draft board. And this surprised me. We talked about it a little off the air. Kerryon Johnson. So once Theo Riddick left town, everyone said, hey, man, this guy's going to pick up every 3rd down, and he's going to catch the ball left and right. He's going to have 50 receptions. Kerryon Johnson, top 5 RB, upside. Let's go. Let's draft this guy early 2nd round. You're pumping the brakes on the Kerryon Johnson hype train.
Well, and I think this shows people, how the thought process works, right? Kerryon Johnson, I was one of the first to pump him up once Theo Riddick was gone. In fact, I wrote an article before Theo Riddick was ever gone and said, here are the paths to value for Kerryon Johnson. The number one bump he can get is if Theo Riddick is released or traded, because that would establish his 3rd down value, which now gives him a better floor, gives him more upside, all those great things. And he's a great receiver out of the backfield. Well, this past week, the Lions, and this is where you got to really dig into this stuff. The Lions didn't play Stafford or the receivers, none of them. And so people look at that and they're like, oh, the Lions didn't play any starters, just don't worry about it. Well, what you may have missed is they played their starting offensive line for 4 series. They played their starting tight ends, which we'll talk about in a minute, for 4 series. Okay, the quarterback they had in to start, shouldn't even be in the league anymore. Is it Joe Johnson? God, he was terrible. But anyway, he was out there for like 5 series. Well, what I saw was Kerryon Johnson in 4 series never played a 3rd down.
Uh-oh.
C.J. Anderson was on the field, and Ty Johnson. Now, a lot of people will be like, oh, my God, this is an overreaction. Okay, timeout. Who's the coach? Matt Patricia. Where does Matt Patricia come from? New England.
Yep.
What does New England do? Specialty backs. Everybody's a specialty back. Now, I think Kerryon Johnson can easily be a 3-down back. But what's the other thing that Mike Patricia has told us all offseason? Even last year when people used to rip him about LeGarrette Blount, right? He said one of his number one goals for his runners, Drake, is to keep them healthy all season. So we've got a coach that's telling us, I don't really want to have a bell cow. We've got a coach that's got a coaching tree history of he doesn't do bell cows. We have a preseason game now where now we have data points validating that. And in preseason, yes, some things don't matter, but what I've seen over the history of doing this and studying these things is specialty type of roles are more likely to stick into the preseason because coaches aren't worried about hiding whether C.J. Anderson is on the field in 3rd down or Kerryon Johnson. What coaches are trying to hide is how they're going to set up punches and counter punches based off of their play calling, sequencing, and they're not going to show certain looks. As far as what people are getting on the field when they have their starters out there, there are certain games where you can get a really good look at that. Here's the other thing. Kerryon Johnson came back in on the 4th series. C.J. Anderson gave him a breather on the 3rd series. Brian Drake, you should be familiar with this. This is the Doug Peterson train. Hey, first guy, you get 2 series. 3rd guy, you're my 3rd down back, Darren Sproles. This other guy, you're going to play every 3rd series. You're just going to take every 3rd series and keep the first guy fresh. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing here. And I could be wrong. Preseason stuff like this isn't perfect, Drake. But if putting all the dots together, if I'm a betting man, I'm betting this plays out into the season. I'm betting it plays out. And so what it means is Kerryon Johnson should still be a 3rd round pick for you, but you shouldn't be taking him at the end of the 2nd anymore. You just shouldn't, because now he's right back where he was, a month ago. He should be a mid to end of the 3rd pick. You shouldn't take him over Devonta Freeman. Devonta Freeman is in a better offense, and he's got his job locked down. I know people are going to say, well, Devonta Freeman can get injured. Kerryon Johnson could get injured. There's a very low percentage difference between a player that's already been hurt versus a player that's not hurt, which Kerryon Johnson actually was last year. Remember, he hurt his knee. He was shut down at the end of the year. But my point being, there's no reason to force Kerryon Johnson anymore. He's still a player to like. He's still a player to target in the 3rd round. You just need to be aware that you may not have the floor that you thought you had, and you also don't have the ceiling that you thought you were getting. In fact, Drake, I would take your man, Damian Williams, over Kerryon Johnson at this point as well.
And trust me, we're going to talk some Devonta Freeman in a few minutes as we get into why I didn't take Michael Thomas in the 2nd round of the Kings Classic. Okay, last guy that's moving down your board, and he's someone going in the middle of the first round, and that's David Johnson. Is this mainly because of what we're seeing from Kyler Murray in this atrocious offensive line?
Yeah, there's just no push with the line. This offensive line 2 weeks in a row has played mostly their starters, and part of those snaps have been against the other team's backups, and they're getting nothing. There's penetration almost every play. There's nothing clean or easy for David Johnson. David Johnson is doing some things on his own just to keep it just manageable, but I wouldn't even call it respectable. Now what he can do as a receiver out of the backfield, they're not showing a lot of that right now in the preseason. I do think that's something they're guarding because on that team, they know he's going to be a key component. So I still feel good about his PPR value, and they don't want to show those looks, but I'm worried about what his rushing could look like. I'm also worried, Drake, that this is a team that could just be getting their wheels shot off every week, and if you're playing from behind, we've talked about it. Your touchdown opportunity as a runner, the teams that win, 10, 11 games versus the teams that win 5, 6 games, there's about a 40% drop in touchdown per attempt ratio between those teams, right? So it's not touchdowns per attempt, but it's total touchdowns scored. And it comes back to you just have less opportunities down around the red zone. And when you do, you want to keep passing because you don't want to stop the clock. So David Johnson, he just doesn't have any kind of ceiling really for me for rushing touchdowns. So I own him a decent amount, but right now I'm not going to take him over Devontae Adams. I'm not going to take him over DeAndre Hopkins. I'm probably, I don't really like him even over, James Conner. I probably don't like him even over Nick Chubb almost at this point. So I know that's kind of a standoffish take, at this point, but there's no positivity with the Cardinals. I think, we're buying into complete vapor.
Exactly. Hey, I'm with you. I think he's being a little overdrafted. Offensive lines matter, folks. You want guys behind good offensive lines like the one in Pittsburgh. And these are guys you have holding steady. You got both Pittsburgh running backs here, James Conner and Jalen Samuel. Why do you have both these guys on here as holding steady? Are you still taking Conner end of first, early second?
Yeah, it's just I put it on here because it's the Twitter hype. What happens is Jalen Samuels had a couple of good runs. And he had one where specifically he ran through a wrap, and then he nearly broke past the next player. It was a really good play, on his part. What people aren't talking about is what James Conner did and the fact that James Conner dominated the touches, Drake. The first 3 drives, Jalen Samuels didn't sniff the field. And this is with the starters out there. Ben didn't play, but all the rest, most of the rest of the starters did play outside of Roethlisberger.
That's what we see from the Steelers. That's what they do. They're not Doug Peterson and the Eagles. They ride that bell cow.
That's exactly right. So, and I was just looking on my notes here just to see if there's anything I was going to share with the folks about Pittsburgh. But the main thing is it looks like it's clearly Connor's backfield. Samuel is the handcuff to own. Benny Snell doesn't look good, but I will say this. As soon as Samuel came in, within 3 carries, they rotated Benny Snell through there too. And then it was Samuels again, then it was Benny Snell again. They were sharing it. So it's not a clear-cut deal where Samuel is just going to run away with this thing if for some reason James Conner's hurt. I do think he's the guy to own. So if you want to take a guy in the 10th round or the 9th round because you want to own a piece of that Steelers rushing attack if James Conner goes down, I still think I do believe at this point Samuel's the guy to own. And I do think he's another guy that's going to have receiving value once the season gets here. Remember, teams will show some things, but not another. They're not going to show you how they're going to use Jalen Samuels. He's the kind of player where you want to keep that all under wraps until the season gets here. So I expect him to be a little more involved than what we've seen, but I don't think it's going to be what people thought. And I think James Conner is a very, very safe early second-round pick. Dude, I will tell you right now, Drake, watching this offensive line play after just watching the Cardinals, oh, my God. This I'm not joking. If people want to watch good offensive line play and watch power running, go watch the Pittsburgh Steelers.
And they lost their offensive line coach.
They wall off a whole side of the field. It's insane. This blocking, they were destroying the defensive line. So it's just all positive stuff, really for for both those guys, they're holding steady. You should feel really good about them, but don't overhype Jalen Samuels.
Yeah.
James Conner looked really good.
Another guy going in that range is my boy, Damian Williams. We've talked about him a little bit here, but just quickly, you've got him holding steady. Mid-second round ADP for you?
Yeah, I'm not taking him in the mid-second just because of some of the unknowns, but here's what I'm going to say. If Hyde continues to lose favor, and then you've got a rookie moving up, that does make me start leaning more towards the proven guy, right? That is showing something. He didn't look great the other night, but he didn't really have a lot of opportunities. He was the first guy. He played the first series. Then Carlos Hyde played the second series. Darwin Thompson didn't work in until later with the backups. He did not play with Mahomes or anyone. But on Damian Williams, I still like him, Drake, at the very beginning of the third. I like him. If I get him in the mid-third, that's really where I love him, and that's where I used to be taking him. I'm at the point now, though, where I'm feeling just good enough that I'm willing to take him at the end of the third. At the beginning of the third. I may even take him, at the very end of the second, just because I see him getting a little bit more work if all of a sudden Darwin Thompson is truly his backup and it's not a veteran like Hyde.
When I think of Damian Williams, I often think of the famous Springsteen song Thunder Road, where they say, "You ain't a beauty, but hey, you're all right." And it ends the song.
You're running into the offense.
When you draft Damian Williams, you can take that last line of the song. This is a town full of losers, and I'm here to win. And that's what you get when you take Damian Williams. Love it. Marlon Mack, next guy up ADP-wise on that list. Is he holding steady, or is he kind of going down because of offense, or he's steady because someone's got to run the ball?
Well, we got multiple things going on, right? Overall, I don't like the Colts offense as much, obviously, without Andrew Luck. He's going to see less chances to score. But the other thing that I noted is Drake, he was out there for a lot of third and longs. He was out there for like a 2nd and 20. So it wasn't immediately, we're in this situation. Nyheim Hines, come onto the field. They weren't doing that. What kills Marlon Mack is he gets no receiving value and he depends on game script. If all of a sudden he can just pick up 30 to 50% of those passing down, he doesn't need them all. If he could just be out there just enough to give us a bump, right? Maybe 15 catches and, a few more carries each game, maybe an extra 15 to 20 catches on the year. Now all of a sudden his volume gets to his steadiness becomes much more like some of the other third round running backs versus what he was last year. Is if that team was leading, he scored like 70% of his fantasy points when their team was leading. When they were tight in a tight game or trailing, it was like 30%. He and Derrick Henry were the two craziest that I've seen in a long time as far as being front runners, meaning their offense needed to be winning. And if it wasn't, if it was close or if they were losing, man, these guys just didn't see anything. And so it creates that inconsistency. So I've got it as holding steady because I would want to see it for another week. But at this point, it at least makes me feel a smidge more comfortable about his ADP if he slid to me at the end of the third and I did need a runner.
Two guys holding steady are on the same team, and their ADP is only separated by 9 spots. So that's Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. I watched that game the other night. Freeman didn't look great in the contest. I thought that Phillip Lindsay still showed a lot of juice, and I think people are kind of down on him for the wrong reasons. I like Phillip Lindsay still. I think he can be a productive second back. I'd ideally like him as a flex maybe. What are you seeing with these two Broncos backs?
I still like Phillip Lindsay the best because I like his explosive playmaking ability. And his ADP is starting to slide down to a point where I am willing to take him. Early in the offseason and into the training camp early on, people were still taking Phillip Lindsay in the 4th round. And what we were hearing from very credible beat reporters was this is going to be a split. This is going to be Freeman and Lindsay. Then what did we see in the preseason game 1? It was a split. Then what did we see this last week? It was a split. And they have Theo Riddick that'll be back in like week 5. Oh, yeah. This last weekend, Devonta freaking Booker worked in there. So we were hoping Booker would be gone. We didn't want Theo Riddick to be signed. And you've got these other two guys splitting the carries, and there isn't many receptions to go around with those other roles potentially lurking. It's just a situation where you don't want to pay a fourth anymore for Lindsey, but I put him and Freeman as holding steady because we've been telling people this for about a month, Drake, that, look, it's going to be a two-way backfield. Freeman is the guy to own because you're getting him in 8th and 9th rounds. At this point, because Lindsey's more explosive, if you can get him in the late 5th, early 6th, I don't mind that as much. And I still like getting Royce Freeman in like the 8th, or 9th. I still like those players. You just have to realize that the upside is going to be capped unless there's an injury in the backfield.
In the 6th round, you can scoop up Austin Eckler. You've got him holding steady. I think he and Justin Jackson are going to split some work in San Diego. Jackson's looking fine out there, but Eckler's the guy who's going to get all the chops in the receiving game. You like him at his 6th round ADP?
Yeah, in the first 3 drives where the Chargers had all of their starters in the game, Austin Eckler had 10 snaps to Justin Jackson's 3. This is the second week in a row that we've seen this. Now, if you put the 4th drive in, which still had Tyrod Taylor in, but some of the other starters came out, Justin Jackson ended up getting 6 out of 8 snaps that drive. Eckler only played on a 3rd and 3 and a 3rd and 10. So the way I'm looking at this is I think Eckler is going to be, if Melvin Gordon doesn't play, I think Eckler, he's going to split carries with Jackson, but he's going to be on the field more and be much more of a PPR asset. If you're building, again, from that end, and we talked about this last week, Drake, if you're building down there and you start off the draft, Odell Beckham Jr., Tyreek Hill, and then you come back and whatever, you take Amari Cooper, and then you stabilize your roster, your runners with a Chris Carson like we talked about, then you're coming back, right, in rounds 5, 6, 7. Eckler's a name to definitely have on your list because as long as Gordon's out, you're going to get RB2 production, some week RB1. If Gordon doesn't play the whole year, that's what you're going to get probably the whole year as long as Eckler isn't hurt, right? You're essentially getting a Damian Williams type back in a really good offense, right? You're getting him for 3 rounds later than Damian Williams because Damian Williams isn't going to have 300 carries. Neither is Eckler. They're going to both try to push 180, 220, somewhere in there, right? And so you're getting Eckler, at a 3-round discount, 3 to 4 round discount versus what Damian Williams is. And so it's a really smart move, and of course people want to know more about that. You go back and listen to the draft plan. We talk about what to do after Austin Eckler, so that if Melvin Gordon comes back, you've got a fallback plan from there.
All right, now that we've finished the running back section, I think it's time we talk about the running back that I took in the 2nd round of the Kings Classic. So for you guys who don't know out there, the Kings Classic is a huge draft put on by Bob Long and Brad Evans of Yahoo out at the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. It's 2 different leagues, the Jim Brown division, the George Blanda division. I was in the Blanda division doing the snake draft, okay? This is a 14-team PPR. There's some big-time guys in this. Mike Tagliere from Fantasy Pros, Marcus Grant from NFL, NFL.com. You've got the guys from Dynasty League Football. You've got guys from Fantasy Sharks. You've got guys from Roto Baller. There's a ton of smart guys in this. So the draft starts off. I have the 12th pick in this draft, okay? And I've done 1,000 mock drafts from the end of the draft in 12-team leagues because in my home league, I'm picking 11th. So I know that back of the draft like the freaking back of my hand and how it's going to go for the first 3-4 rounds, okay? So you'd think at the 12 hole, maybe I'm going to get a shot at Dalvin Cook. Maybe, Julio falls and you can get a guy there. Nope, let's talk about this. 9 running backs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 running backs, go off the board in front of me. I'm picked 12 in a 12-team PPR. The only receiver to go is Juju Smith-Schuster.
So you're a 14-man, right? 14-man.
This is 14-team PPR. DeAndre Hopkins is on the board. This is a no-brainer. I take DeAndre Hopkins. Okay? Now, if this is a 12-team league, I'd be on the hook here, and I would have my shot at Gurley. I could go Julio. I could take Kelsey, any of these guys if I wanted to, knowing that coming back to me in 3, I'm going to have a shot at a pretty good PPR running back still. 14-team league, that is not the case, especially with running backs going off this hot and heavy. So I made the decision to not zig when others zag. I know in your draft plan that we talked about last week, you said you would go receiver at the back end of a 12 team. I said, knowing this board and how these guys are drafting, I have to get a running back here. I know it's not great when you're forced to do something in a draft, and Matt Camp kind of took me to task on Sirius over the weekend, and they said it was a bad pick of taking Freeman instead of Michael Thomas. Now, I get it. Michael Thomas is fantastic. Guy went 125 for 1405 and 9 touchdowns last year. You don't have to explain that to me. But I've got DeAndre Hopkins. There's no way, as they mentioned on their show, they're like, oh, you can get anybody as your RB1. And you just find guys from here on out. Wait a minute. So now I'm putting myself behind the 8 ball at running back, and I'm going to find guys throughout the season. I'm going to put it up in a 14-team league. I'm just hoping and praying somebody falls to me off the waiver wire. No, I'm not doing that. Devonta Freeman is a guy I really like. I think in this offense, where his offensive coordinator is the same guy, when he was the number 1 running back in fantasy about 4 years ago, I think he's going to be a guy who can catch 70 balls. He could rush for 1,000 yards, easily get you double-digit touchdowns. So before I go on, Dwayne, if you're in that spot, what would you have done?
Now, I understand the logic. I've been in those 14-man drafts. One of my home leagues used to be a 14-man, deal, and they're a beast of their own. And to your point, I think the drop off at runner, I'm assuming that Mixon, Gurley, Chubb, Dalvin Cook, all gone, right? So Devonta Freeman's your best runner remaining on your board, period.
Yep.
You're playing, that one's a full point PPR.
Yes. And mind you, I'm using your rankings and tiers.
Right. So full point PPR, I've got Michael Thomas and Devonta Freeman, they're 20 points apart. Mm-hmm. So I don't mind the decision that you made. It's not popular for ADP, but I think you grab a solid player and you thought more about roster construction, right? One quick note on Freeman. This isn't the same coordinator where he was the top runner in the league. That was Shanahan.
Was it? I thought it was Cutter.
No, Cutter was there before, that. It was when it was, no, it's okay. But here's what you're right about on with Cutter. Whenever he was with Matt Ryan before, they utilized the running backs a ton out of the backfield. This is not Jameis Winston pushing the ball down the field, which is part of why we like Freeman. We have no more Tevin Coleman. You got 2 unproven guys behind him. It's going to be a good offense. You got a good quarterback. Your offensive line should be a little bit better. There's other players to take the pressure off of you. I have no problem with it. Let me ask you this.
Great schedule also against a terrible run defense division.
What runners were left? Let's put this to task, right? What runners were remaining when it got back to you in the third?
This is why I did it. Because I tell you people, I've done this mock 1,000 times. So I take Freeman. So now I got Hopkins and Freeman. Here it comes back to me in the 3rd round. So let's say I took the receiver there. Okay, I take Michael Thomas. My choice in a full point PPR as my RB1 can either be Derrick Henry, who Dwayne will catch more passes than this year, Tevin Coleman, who I like, but he's going to split with 2 or 3 guys once everyone's healthy there, Miles Sanders, Mark Ingram, who's not going to catch any balls, Lindsey, who we just talked about in a timeshare. Then the next 2 guys off the board were Latavius Murray and Austin Eckler.
Wow.
So Chris Carson was gone. One of those guys is my RB1?
Chris Carson was gone.
Yep.
Yeah. So if Carson's gone, Josh Jacobs are gone, and you're facing Derrick Henry or having to take Tevin Coleman, that soon. And I'm with you. I'm okay with Tevin Coleman in the 5th.
Tevin Coleman went with the last pick of the 3rd round in this draft.
See, here's funny, Drake. Here's where I'm going to defend you on this. You got your chops busted for taking Freeman in the 2nd. When you look in the 3rd and everybody, they all reached on running backs in the 3rd. They all reached. Why? Because they needed to have one. You decided, I want to have one. And guess what? You got the better one. Yeah. I will take Devonta Freeman 20 times out of 20 over Derrick Henry. I will take him 20 times out of 20 over Austin Eckler, over Tevin Coleman, over Phillip Lindsay, over Mark Ingram. It's not close. He's 2 full tiers above those guys. Yeah. So I think, so who'd you end up taking in the third?
So just to back it up for a second, the reason running backs are flying off the board, 3 teams, 3 started running back, running back, running back.
Yeah.
In a 14-teamer. So when I see this, I go, I can't do this. I got to have Freeman. So it comes back, again, full point PPR. Who's left on the board? Who could I take here? How about the Super Bowl MVP, Julian Edelman? A guy last year who caught, 74 balls for 6 touchdowns. If you extrapolate out what he was doing, he would have had a great season, well over 100 catches, and he should have that again this year. Now with Josh Gordon coming back, it's going to open up even more things inside for him. No Gronk. I'm super happy with that in a PPR. Hopkins, Edelman, you only need to start 2 wide receivers and 2 running backs in this league, and then there's 2 flex. So I went Hopkins, Freeman, Edelman.
Yeah, I have no issues with that, and it works out, kind of similar. If you had taken Mike Thomas, the difference between him and Edelman, is about 50 points. The difference between Freeman and Derrick Henry is about 60 points on the board. So you end up close, but the way you feel, in my opinion, about the consistency you should expect from your team having Freeman and Edelman versus having Thomas and Derrick Henry, I feel 2 totally different ways. I feel much better about Edelman being – he's not going to be Michael Thomas. I get it. But he's going to score consistent points versus Derrick Henry is going to be a freaking roller coaster.
So now we're in round 4, okay? Here's I'm not going to go through my whole team with you round by round, but in round 4, this is where I shock the world, okay? I'm looking at the board. On the clock, I'm sitting there and I'm staring at my sheet, and I see James White's there, but I just took Julian Edelman. I can't get this locked into Patriot guys this early in the draft. I can't do it. Mark Ingram's there. I like Mark Ingram. Guy's going to catch 6 balls all season, okay? Lindsey, Murray, Eckler, those are the guys there. Nobody remembers in these leagues anybody besides the winner, okay? So I'm shooting for upside. I drop the hammer and I take Miles Sanders. Was it early? You're damn right it's early. But look at the other guys around him. If he hits as my RB2, I've got a great shot in this league. And again, I've only got to start 2, and I've got a bell cow in Freeman. And I come back with a ton of receivers afterwards to fill in my flex spots of Jarvis Landry, Corey Davis, Dante Pettis, DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin. Those guys can all slide into the flex. Not to mention, I also got Peyton Barber, who will be a serviceable running back when needed. Alexander Madison, who if Delvin Cook dies, which he does every year, becomes a top RB. And Dallas Goedert. So
yeah,
that was my squad.
When you sent it to me, my only criticism of it was after you got Miles Sanders, you should have tried to slide one more, back in there as far as a floor. But then once you told me, like I started listening to the guy, I kind of listened. I think I sent you like, hey, here are 5 guys, and I know you have my sheet, but I'm like, I'd be thinking about these guys, and you're in like the 6th round, and these are guys I would take in the 7th or 8th, and I think your reply was all gone.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a little shaky, but I think, Peyton Barber is going to be the starter. He's looked better than Ronald Jones. It's still going to be a committee, so it's going to be a little dicey there. But I did like the fact that you circled back, and you got Peyton Barber. I love getting Alexander Madison because honestly, he's almost like getting Miles Sanders 8 rounds later. I mean, that's how good I feel about Alexander Madison. Now, I'm talking about his ceiling, because that's assuming, if something happened with Dalvin Cook. Miles Sanders has a much more clear path. He could beat Jordan Howard out, right, for his role. Madison's probably not going to do that with Cook. He needs an injury in front of him. So I don't want folks to misunderstand. But the ceiling of it in the Gary Kubiak running scheme with an improved offensive line, Madison, said if all of a sudden both of those guys hit and you have all the receivers you have, you're going to be feeling really, really, really good.
By the way, my quarterback in the 12th round is Russell Wilson, so I feel really good about that. Chris Prince from Roto Grinders, drafted in the 11th spot right before me. he sniped me almost every time that I was ready to pick. He took Dalvin Cook from me. He took Amari Cooper from me. He took Evan Ingram from me. He took Carson Wentz from me. So I just felt awful. When he took Carson Wentz, I literally screamed out, son of a bitch. I go, I'm never subscribing to Roto Grinders again. I'm done with you guys. So again, now I'm looking.
It's a sign of a good drafter, man. Yeah. You love to be the guy in a draft, and you feel the guy that's after you. Just you keep hearing him just kind of do that. They do that exhale, until finally it's something, audible. That's what we try to prepare people to do. Apparently, Chris Prince knows what the hell he's doing.
Oh, I love his team, and it's just one of those things. When you're in a snake draft, there's nothing you can do because they get to pick before you do. So what can you do about it?
Let's plow through these receivers, Drake. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's get off of that. But an awesome time out at the Kings Classic. Got to meet so many fun people, and it was very, very fun. And next year, Dwayne, maybe you can come out there and drink some beers with us.
Hey, I wanted to. It sounds like it was awesome. I really wish I could have. Schedule just didn't work out, and then I was here, with my eyes bleeding, watching film for you, Drake.
All right, let's plow through this quickly here. Wide receivers moving up in the world. Dante Moncrief. Now, people are going to see Dante Moncrief and be like, wait a minute, but James Washington, is having this awesome camp. And James Washington's scoring touchdowns, and he's catching passes all over the place for almost 80 yards a week. Why do you have Moncrief there? And you, conversely, have James Washington on the downslide. So explain what you're seeing here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and so you know me, Drake. I love James Washington. And he's one of the guys I've been touting since June. But this is why, being constantly reevaluating your position based on players, based on things that really matter, and digging for these things that, I'll be honest, I bet no one finds this nugget on any other podcast. I can almost guarantee it, because it's really hard to find some of this stuff. You have to really dig, and there's a lot of hard workers, but I doubt there's many podcasts that are going to talk about this. So here's what's happening in Pittsburgh real quick. Juju Smith-Schuster is the Z, right? That means he is the flanker. He gets to line up off the line of scrimmage, right? Because he's usually on the side of the field with the tight end. He does not have to cover the center in his alignment. The X receiver is Dante Moncrief. He's usually on the opposite side of the field, sometimes on the same side of the field, but usually lines up closer to the line of scrimmage, easier to be pressed. So in this last game, Moncrief and Juju played the X and the Z the first three drives. So that's point number one. I'm not a huge Dante Moncrief fan. I've been in James Washington's camp all along. Well, then you see James Washington, like you say, he played down the field great, Drake. He caught a ball in the teeth of the defense on a dig. He just plucks it out of the air, makes a juke move past the next guy, lowers his head like a linebacker against the next guy. Run after the catch ability is strong. Strong hands. He had a ball way over his head. He leapt out of his shoes and caught it. He had a bomb thrown to him where he had to adjust back, made a great hands catch. And so for a guy that's loved James Washington all along, when people see that, they're like, oh, dude, your guy's coming alive. And he is. But here's what I saw. When Juju left the field, guess who played Z? Washington. If you're playing behind Juju Smith-Schuster in this offense, that's not a good place to be. Juju's going to be on the field all the time. And guess what? Deontay Johnson came in and played the X for Moncrief. Moncrief is the shaky piece in this offense. He's the guy, whoever's behind him, that's the piece I want to own, Drake, because I think Moncrief's the one that could falter. I'm not against owning Moncrief, but if I'm taking another receiver late, you now got to look at Deontay Johnson. Here's the next component of it. I think I know why the Steelers are playing James Washington at Z.
Ooh, this is good stuff.
How you line him up off the line of scrimmage? Guess what I noticed?
Turn your volume up if you're listening right now.
I charted. When he faced off coverage, all of his big plays came. Playing against zone, cover 3, James Washington lit it up. Whenever they went to press or man coverage, he could not get free. His routes were delayed. His timing was off. And he's a strong guy, but he does not have good footwork is what I'm going to tell you. You see some guys that, they can turn guys around and then, they'll use their hands to do the swipe. He has pretty strong hands, but his feet, he just doesn't get a good release. And it was every time I saw him impress. Because guess what? On the opposite side of the field, who's out there with him is Deontay Johnson. They're both running streaks. Every time you saw that situation, Deontay Johnson had already cleared his guy and had a step on his guy whenever James Washington was just getting even with his guy. And you can just freeze it and you keep looking at it. And this happened over and over. So again, you piece everything together. You're playing behind Juju. They're getting you off the line of scrimmage. They're trying to protect you, to let you do your thing. The problem is you're behind the best receiver on the offense. James Washington, I'll tell you right now, he is the best run after the catch receiver this team has. But they got to figure out a way to get him on the field when they still have Juju out there. And guess what? He never got to play in the slot. He played the slot like 1 or 2 snaps. With the starters, it was Eli Rogers and Ryan Switzer rotating in the snap every play. Guess why? Because they have a quick release. They're quick in and out of breaks. Washington is more of a drag guy, a crosser guy, a post guy, a streak guy. He doesn't show a lot as far as his quick breaks. He runs a really good dig. That takes sinking your hips and breaking inside. He runs an okay out. But he's not the best at creating separation on those things. He's great with the ball in his hands. He's great winning contested catches. But you put it all together and you see what's happening. And the other thing is I gained an appreciation for Deontay Johnson in this game. He had a back shoulder catch that was crazy good, but he got a touchdown that was nullified. Then he caught another touchdown where he had to outwork the defender, and dive down on the ground in the end zone to scoop under it and catch it. The guy played really good. He's coming into his own, and he's beating press coverage. So I don't see a way right now for Washington to easily get on the field. I'm still going to say you draft Washington based on his upside, and you can still make a plan to get him on your roster in round 11 or 12 or 13 and see if they can figure out a way to get him out there, right? But it's not looking really good. But Deontay Johnson, you can get for free right now, Drake,
absolutely,
in drafts. And if you're in a deep league, you should be drafting Deontay Johnson. If you're in a dynasty league, you should be drafting Deontay Johnson because he's very likely he's got the cleanest path, and he showed some really good skill. He's got the cleanest path to value because I think Moncrief is the weak link.
A guy who is just flying up draft boards this summer is getting buzz like you've never heard before. And it's all coming out of Carolina, and it's Curtis Samuel. Currently going off the board is wide receiver 32 in the 6th round, according to the FFWC ADP. That shocked me when I looked that up. But, boy, everything out of camp on this guy is that he is blowing up.
Right. And the thing with Samuel is, you used to be able to get him 10th, 11th, 12th round. Just the same thing with Marquise Valdez-Scantling. There's a lot of guys that have shot up the board. But it's due to the consistent positive, stories. And when you go see these things and it's from all of the media sources, there's some truth to it. Now, does it scare me really about DJ Moore? No. Why? Because the job DJ Moore is going to be doing, working intermediate and short, he's still likely to catch the most balls. He's not going to have as many yards per catch. And what he does is not super flashy, right? He's more the Julian Edelman kind of role in this offense. So it's not something that, the media is going to look at and say, oh, look at DJ Moore, catching all these deep touchdowns. That's not going to be his role. So 2 points on this. Don't take this as meaning DJ Moore, isn't going to have value because he is. But you do need to pay attention to the Curtis Samuel hype. And I'm okay actually with Curtis Samuel in the 6th or 7th round at this point, because it's been enough positive vibes. He's got the big play ability. There's just a lot of things to like. As a wide receiver 3, I have no issue with Curtis Samuel. And so if you're going into a draft this weekend and he's a guy you want, you're going to have to, he's a guy that you got to pull the trigger on, a little earlier than what you used to, a couple weeks back.
I bet in a home league, though, he's going to fall a little more. That's in a high stakes league here at Full-Time Fantasy. There's no way the average Jamoke in a home league is snagging him in the 6th. I could be wrong, but I think you're going to be able to get him. If you want him, you could get him in the 8th. Yeah,
I agree. I've shared, my tiers with several home league drafters, so far. And when I get back their teams, you're like, holy crap, people getting Devonta Freeman in the 4th round, Drake, loaded teams, people getting Chris Carson in the 6th on the same team. They're like, man, you told me to get these running backs, and they all just kept falling to me, and I just kept taking them all. And you're like, well,
where the hell was that when I was in Canton?
Exactly. You don't get that treatment there, right, Drake?
By the way, thank you so much to the guys out there who are listening to this podcast who hit us up on Twitter. I'm at Drake Fantasy. He's at Dwain McFarland. Spell his first name Dwain, McFarland. Thanks for hitting us up, telling us that you love the show, and asking us draft questions. We appreciate it. We got a lot of time for guys who listen to The Hustle. So if you're listening to the show, you hit us up. Trust me, we're going to get back to you. Dwayne's great about it. Like, he's even sharing his tears with people. And I'm going to be using those in my home leagues myself. So thank you guys very much. Let's go over to the Jets now. You got a couple of their receivers here in the stock up column. Robbie Anderson and Quincy Enunwa. Anderson going in that 6th round range. Enunwa, who was really good last year when he played in the slot. Tell me what you're seeing here. I'm sure it's a lot of the same Sam Darnold stuff we talked about at the Open.
Well, the big thing for Robbie Anderson, and we talked about this about 6 weeks ago, and even Adam Gase had mentioned it during minicamp. He mentioned it again in training camp at the beginning, that they wanted to see Robbie Anderson turn into a full receiver. And we had mentioned on our show that that was the key to unlocking the value for Robbie Anderson. You can't just be the deep threat. You can't just run goes and posts and then an occasional comeback because everybody's afraid of your speed. You need to be able to do more than that. Your on the field application, meaning the way a coach can trust to use you, that he knows you can win more often than not, it needs to be diverse. The more diverse it is, the more opportunity you're now going to get. And what we're seeing from Robbie Anderson is he's running slants, Drake. He's running digs. He's running outs. He caught a back shoulder fade in this last game. He is stepping up his game. Right now, I'm taking him in a heartbeat over Christian Kirk. In a heartbeat. It's not even close. I'm taking him over Allen Robinson. Darnold, like you said, we already talked about him. He's coming on. Robbie Anderson, I won't be surprised right now with what I'm seeing. I don't see him as being, Drake, like a 28% catch guy because they have so many good weapons. But I think he could sneakily, I think he could push that 24%. He could be the lead guy on a pretty balanced offense, and he's always still got the ability to pop you with the big one. And guess what? When you can work underneath and you make DBs respect that part of the game, guess what opens up behind it? Your deep game becomes even more viable. We've seen guys that have nowhere near Robbie Anderson's speed, but were really great route technicians and setting up routes that had sneaky deep potential just because they could get DBs off balance. So Anderson is not elite in these areas yet, but he's showing enough growth, Drake, that he should be squarely in people's draft plans. I don't know what his ADP is right now. I haven't drafted any teams in like the last 4 days, but I was getting him in the 6th round, sometimes in the 7th.
Where he's going. He's wide receiver 31, going just ahead of Curtis Samuels.
Right. And I'll quickly hit on Enunwa. Enunwa's free, and he's being targeted a decent amount. What you're going to have here is similar to the Rams. This team is probably, Drake, going to run 11 personnel almost every play. And that's what they're designed to do. And they're going to create mismatches all over the field. You're going to see all of these guys in the 17 to 22% target range. Think Rams. That's what you're going to get from these receivers of the Jets. So think now it's not going to be as efficient as the Rams, right? Because they're still turning into who they could be, but they've made a lot of upgrades on offense. You got a young quarterback. Remember, Jared Goff took his big step in year 2. Sam Darnold could be sneaky, man. We could be looking up next year and going, oh man, Quincy Enunwa, he's a 7th, 8th round pick. It could happen. And right now, what can you get him for free?
Mm-hmm.
So, and we talked about Crowder. We talked about Crowder last week. So yeah, these guys, as they fall in the draft Crowder in the 12th, Enunwa in the 14th, 15th. Those are easy value picks. These guys are going to see 18 to 20% of the targets from an improving quarterback and an improving offense.
We'll quickly touch on Emmanuel Sanders. He's going off the board at wide receiver 46. Guy looked great last night? On Monday? Yeah, Monday's game. And wow, I mean, that end around that he took, he looked phenomenal. Let's again say, though, he's 32. He had Achilles surgery. Then he had surgery on the other foot. I think he had ankle problems there. He looks great. He looks like the old Emmanuel Sanders. I'm still a tad bit apprehensive, but this guy's going way late in draft, so could be a big-time bargain for the ageless Emmanuel Sanders in Denver.
That's the big takeaway. He's just cheap, and he looks like he's on track. Originally, when you see guys ahead of schedule, it's a good thing. Albert Wilson, behind schedule, not good, right? You look at a guy like, Emmanuel Sanders, they were thinking, our plan is just to hope that he's healthy come week 1. That was the original plan. Then it was, we want him to have a shot at week 1. Well, now you're in week 2 of the preseason taking end rounds, and you look pretty good on it. It's just a positive step. If he is fully healthy, he'll probably be the top target, if not the second most, depending on how much Cortland Sutton grows, because Sutton had a lot of issues in his game last year. So Emmanuel Sanders is going to be the guy that Joe Flacco is most likely going to rely on if he's healthy, and like you said, he's cheap.
I can take this next section of guys in the downgrade section very simply. So you've got Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald. Then you've got T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell. You've got teammates. You've got some shaky quarterback situations. We don't know what's going on there. Downgrade. It's pretty much that simple.
That's it. To make it actionable, move T.Y. Hilton below Stephon Diggs and Julian Edelman, because I got him close anyway. Just move him down for now. If you want to keep him above Edelman, you can. But, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to take Antonio Brown over him. I'm going to take I know. Well, I take Antonio Brown way later than everyone else, so I'm not going to get Antonio Brown. But I've got Stephon Diggs, over him. There's no reason to press it with T.Y. at this point now that you've got a potential issue. I wasn't as high on T.Y. as everyone else was anyway, because you brought in Devin Funchess, you drafted Paris Campbell. You added Eric Ebron last year. You've got a pass catching back and Nyheim Hines. This is an offense that likes to be multiple, like the Eagles, right? They're not going to have a certain person that's going to get 33%. They don't have a Zach Ertz, right? So with this particular team, I was never as high on Hilton. In fact, I had him like at 23% of the target share, and that's where I left him. But when you shave off part of those games and you give it to Luck, you give it to Jacoby Brissett. And, oh, by the way, it could be more than 4 games. I'm just saying there's a lot of bad vibes here. There's no reason to force it with T.Y. Hilton. Once you get down to Julian Edelman and then the Chris Godwin, which is the next name we can talk about in a minute, that's where, I'm still okay with potentially pulling the trigger on T.Y. Hilton. But I'm going to be honest with you. He may just be a straight-out fade for me at this point, Drake.
Let's talk about Godwin. You've got him in the holding steady category. Boy, I tell you, there's guys out there in fantasy land, they're putting him in the top 12 of their wide receiver rankings. You and I were talking about this guy in freaking February blowing up. Now everyone else has followed suit and must have listened to our show. Chris Godwin just doesn't leave the field, and he looks freakishly good.
And that's what I've put out on Twitter and these, reports around these, preseason games. When the starters are out there, he doesn't leave the field, even in 13 personnel, which means, 3 tight ends. He's the guy that's out there, not Evans. The other thing is when you look at the limited design stuff we can see, I don't pay a ton of attention to it, but knowing Arians' offense so well because I've studied it so long, Mike Evans is working vertical. This offense is a vertical offense. Mike Evans is a great player vertical. But I've been saying this since, like you said, since when, Drake, that the targets are going to be way closer than what people think. Arians has bombarded his big slot receiver or his Z receiver with targets. Every year he's had a viable one, right? And think about where they work. They work in the intermediate, shorter areas of the field, the place that the quarterback's going to trust. It's a higher percentage throw. Mike Evans not working in that area. He's going to work a lot of stuff deep. He's not getting as near the versatility of, not versatility, but he's not getting near the various types of looks that Chris Godwin is going to get. And I'm not saying I hate Mike Evans. I don't. He's a great fit for what Arians wants to do vertically, but don't be surprised. Now, the problem with Chris Godwin is we used to be able to get him in the 5th round. We're seeing him go in the 3rd round now, right? So here's where I'm not necessarily against it, though. Let's say you get to Antonio Brown and you're just worried he's a head case. Let's say you get to T.Y. Hilton, we just talked about. Okay. Let's say we get to Julian Edelman, who I love, but you're just you like to swing for upside and you want to take Chris Godwin. That's kind of the point where if you want to push it with him, you can. I'm not forcing it, but I draft quite a few teams, so I wait until it's a value, because I've still had drafts within the last week where I didn't have to take him in the 3rd round. I've had him fall to me at the end of the 4th. I even got him like early 5th, one draft. So it's not every draft where this happens. But yeah, here's the problem though, Drake, is we're triple counting this stuff at this point. And now we're kind of getting to the point to really, can his ADP, how much more upside can we squeeze out of it if all of a sudden now he's a 3rd-round pick and all of a sudden people are taking him over Amari Cooper, Keenan Allen, guys like that. That's where it starts to become questionable for me. We got to keep an eye on Keenan Allen's ankle. That was kind of a crazy situation where, it's an ankle, he's working on it. And the part of the quote that nobody reported originally was, we don't know if he's going to need surgery or not. I just saw that today and I was like, what the? Apparently.
That's one of those things, Dwayne, that happens. And then later in the season, in December, when you and I are here talking about playoff leagues, you're like, oh, yeah, but remember the preseason injury that Keenan Allen suffered? And then some reporter throws out like, oh, yeah, he had this lingering injury that bothered him all year, and that's why he caught 60 balls and missed 5 games.
Right.
These are the kind of things that happen.
They do. And they just kind of, for whatever reason, like the Chargers are like the hardest place to get anything out of a beat reporter. It's like, there's not a lot coming out of that area.
The fans don't care. The beat writers don't care. Everyone's moved on.
I have no clue what it is, but I just know the news is more limited. One other guy in this holding steady, but honestly, I mean, it's Corey Davis. He looked really good. Now he was playing against backup Patriot cornerbacks, but he destroyed his man every play. Now Mariota isn't always seeing him, but at the same time, Corey Davis is a guy that you're getting in the 8th and 9th rounds of drafts. He was an early 1st-round pick, just 2 years ago. He led the team in targets last year. Yes, they added additional targets, but you're getting a big discount on a guy that has a lot of talent. If you're getting him in, that 8th round range. And what I'm seeing on film is he looks good. And so you need some things to come together for him, but
quarterback play, holy smokes.
But you don't get a chance to get a player with the talent he has typically this late, in a fantasy draft at receiver. I love him as my wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and you're going to draft more, so you're not guaranteed you're having to start him, but I still like stashing him as an upside play. One other guy we missed that's in the down bucket, Drake, Calvin Ridley.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm seeing with this Dirk Cutter offense, again, not revealing the types of plays and everything he's going to run, but if you look at personnel, I don't think this offense is going to clip 75%, in 11, which is 3 wide. And guess what? Calvin Ridley isn't on the field whenever it's 2 wide receiver sets.
Hello, Mo Sanu, the most forgotten man in fantasy.
And it doesn't mean I want to run out and grab Sanu. He is basically free in drafts. So if you're in a pinch and you took some upside receivers and you need like a week 1, just give me somebody that might catch 4 balls. That's going to be Mo Sanu. I still expect Calvin Ridley to be the number 2 target on this team. The problem is a lot of times he gets drafted very early in the 1st, or sometimes I've seen him go even earlier than that. And I like the player. I love the skill set. He looks good in preseason. But the upside that we thought might be there, it's just not there. Because he doesn't have a chance to push this into a 1A, 1B kind of scenario with Julio Jones. That was a potential outcome for him as recently as 2 weeks ago, was that, there could be a scenario where it's Julio Jones 27% and this guy gets 24, 25. That's not going to happen. He's going to need, a Julio Jones injury to probably get out of like the 20 to 22% target share, which he'll be efficient. He'll be solid. Just realize if you take him, you're going to hit some bumpy weeks. He's still going to be a good player. Just don't take him thinking, oh my God, I'm getting this is going to potentially be my wide receiver 1. It'll be really hard for him to have that kind of upside.
You know who my wide receiver 4 is in the Kings Classic?
Who?
Corey Davis.
I love it. I love it.
Maybe Ryan Tannehill will come in the game and help me out a little bit. Before we go to tight end, Dwayne, I want to quickly go to a segment we're going to call Who's Trolling Dwayne Now? Because Dwayne puts out a lot of great content on Twitter, and you should always be following him, and he's got like 5,000 followers now. It's amazing. I remember following the guy when he had 3 people following him. It was literally me, Matt Waldman, and his mom. So you said something that I learned this summer is Twitter suicide. And that is, you talked about Josh Allen. The Bills Mafia pounced. They're all over you. They're trashing our show. They're saying we got garbage takes. They're saying you're an idiot. What the hell happened?
My favorite was, who the hell wears a checkered shirt with a plaid tie? And I think the guy called me an effing moron, to be precise. But I retweeted that one. I thought it was pretty good. But, Drake, my tie, it's almost Buffalo Bills colors. It's very close. And so, I thought I was trying to represent. But, here's my thing. I'm not trying to be a Josh Allen hater. I don't have a bias towards these players. I'm watching all of these games, and I'm taking into context what I saw last year, what I saw last week. And so I shared an example, of a play where Josh Allen made a completion to Cole Beasley, but basically, Cole Beasley had to go out of his way to catch it and fall down, and he could get no rack yards. And that just lit Twitter up. And that was his only bad pass all game. He was 100% accurate. I think there was another fantasy person even say that. I didn't even mess with it because I know it's a no-win proposition just to go back and forth, right? But what I want to say is it's nothing against Josh Allen. It's something I want all these players to succeed. I hope that he improves that area of his game. And I even put it, what's funny is, Drake, if you read the tweet, it actually says, general accuracy improving through a great seam route. Here's the one thing I'm still seeing. But because you post that one thing, it's like, oh my God, you hate Josh Allen. And I don't. I don't hate him. Now, I don't love him for fantasy. I'd rather have Sam Darnold because I think he is a better passer as far as being able to hit all the different levels of the field more accurately, more often. I like his receiving core, better than what the Bills have. So I'm not a big Josh Allen fan as far as fantasy goes, but I don't hate the guy, When you complete 52% of your passes last year, though, and despite he did have the highest average depth of target, so to give context, that is harder. But even if you adjust that for average depth of target, like 57, 58% is about where he should have been, and he was well below that. So all I'm saying is we've seen this with him in the past. It's still popping up. He needs to work on that. And if he ever does, Drake, and it's still while his legs are useful, he could be a viable fantasy quarterback.
They don't want to hear in Buffalo that he's not a finished product. They think he's literally Steve Young right now. Okay? I live a few hours from Buffalo. I go to Buffalo Bills home games. Okay.
What's funny is part of me
delusional.
Part of me respects it. I like a strong fan base, and I did find out that hashtag Bills Mafia, they are mafia. They want to
I can't wait to promote this show and
they want to mess you
Bills
up.
Mafia hashtags.
Oh God!
My favorite
started again. They just finally stopped. Don't do it again, please. Jesus.
My favorite tweets here as we move off of this was some clown from Western New York, and I live in Central New York, so I can make fun of you. So to be fair, that person does not represent the fan base. Talking about somebody who subtweeted Dwayne. That being said, don't be bashing Allen and expect us to listen to your podcast. Winky face. And the guy underneath that tweets, well, to be fair, there's so many podcasts we can listen to for terrible takes.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
It was I got some entertainment out of it for sure.
Let's swing over to the tight ends now. And moving up in the world, O.J. Howard going off the board at tight end 6th. You can get him in the 6th round. Everybody who's giving out fantasy advice right now is saying, wait on the tight end. This is the tier you want to get to. Let the big three pass by. Maybe there becomes value there, but there's a reason everyone's saying that. It's because guys like O.J. Howard and Hunter Henry are good players. And if you can get them in the 6th, it's a hell of a steal for your team, and you're going to be loading up on runners and receivers in the first 5 rounds.
Yeah. And we talked about it last week in the draft plan. We talked about how to approach tight end, and that really you should just wait. I'm not drafting them early. Now, the guy that I'm taking when they slide is Howard, if I'm going to take one, in the 5th or 6th round. If I pull the trigger, it's always him. Here's the deal. The guy is going to see more snaps and more plays than he's ever seen in his life. He's not coming off the field in 12. I hear, whoa, what about Cameron Brate? Guess what? When Cameron Brate's on the field, it's with O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard last week had 1 snap after he caught a ball and got tackled and went to the sideline for a second. 1 snap out of 11 where Brate replaced him. And as soon as Howard had his little breather, whatever was going on, he was back on the field. So he's going to play more than he's ever played. He is, an elite physical specimen. He's a mismatch down the middle of the field. If there's a tight end, from that middle tier of Hunter Henry and Howard and Evan Ingram, I clearly give Howard the best chance to push into that other tier, right? the top tier. And it won't be on as many catches, but he's a very efficient player, and he's going to be on the field a lot. Now, you obviously know my love for Vance McDonald, so we don't need to go there. But there's a player that we talked about last week, Drake, in our draft plan we got to touch on real quick before we leave, because Mark Andrews is a guy that we said, hey, you don't get Vance McDonald, turn around in the 10th and take Mark Andrews. And then if not, your next fallback plan, is Kyle Rudolph. All right, here's the deal with Andrews. He is only seeing the field about a third of the time. They are rotating Hayden Hurst. They're rotating him, and they're rotating Boyle. Guess what? This is not new. They did this last year. And I talked about it when we originally talked about Mark Andrews way back earlier in the offseason. The anticipation was under Greg Roman, who used to run the 49ers offense, when he had Delaney Walker and whenever he had Vernon Davis, was, even on less snaps, he can still be efficient because he can be the guy down the seams. Well, back then, Vernon Davis was still at least playing 65, 70% of the snaps, and he could still be very efficient. He wasn't playing 30% of the snaps. Our hope was that Andrews was so good and he gelled so much with Lamar Jackson that his role would grow. And now a lot of people can say, oh, it's the preseason, they're resting him. Here's the reason I don't believe that. Because we already saw it last year. And Drake, remember last year when we started talking about this, once Greg Roman basically took over, Morningway was still there, but it basically became Roman's offense once Lamar Jackson became the quarterback, because he had done these things with Colin Kaepernick, and they wanted to install this heavy run game and this multiple look passing offense. Remember what we talked about. It wasn't just tight ends. Every position rotates. Every position. No receiver was running routes on 90% of the quarterback dropbacks. It dropped to like 80%. Snaps dropped to like 70%. This is an offense that wants to throw multiple people at you, and they run high tempo. They want to run a lot of plays, okay? So knowing that, Mark Andrews, I'm still okay drafting him, because if Boyle goes down, if Hayden Hurst gets hurt, which he was hurt a lot last year, you have a tight end one on those weeks. What you have to do, though, and you can still take him first. Remember last week we talked about how to take an upside runner maybe ahead of the points you haven't projected for, because you're buying the upside, and how to turn around and come back and protect your investment later at other positions or at the same position. Same thing goes here. If you draft Mark Andrews in the 10th or 11th round, you got to come back and get our guy Kyle Rudolph, who we talked about last week. If you want to know more about him, you can go listen to last week's podcast. But you got a pair. You got to make sure you get a pair. So I still like taking him, but come week one, start Kyle Rudolph. Don't start Mark Andrews. You're living on a wing and a prayer. This is the offense that's going to throw the least passes in the league, probably, unless it's Seattle. And you're going to be using a guy that's going to be on the field for about 50% of Lamar Jackson's passes. People are going to say, you just said 30%. 30% of snaps, he will be on the field for 50% of their passing plays. Two different things. Mm-hmm. That's not enough, Drake. No. It's not enough to really count on it week in and week out, as good as he may be.
Let me give you some context here from the Kings Classic. Real smart guys out here drafting 14-team league. I did get Kyle Rudolph because I got snipped on a bunch of other tight ends. I got him in round 11. O.J. Howard went in the 4th round of this draft. Henry and Ingram went in the 5th. Vance McDonald went in the 6th. Andrews went at the end of the 8th round.
Yep.
So these guys, they're moving here. Let's talk about a guy who's moving up in the world. He went in the Kings Classic in round 12. And if you look at what he's doing, he's playing in all personnel groups, and he's playing every snap with the starters so far in the preseason. He's coming off the board at tight end 20 in the 15th round, according to FFWC. That is Oakland Raiders tight end Darren Waller. He's a little banged up here in camp, but wow, it seems like the sky's the limit for this former wide receiver.
Yeah, and the big thing for him is he played in 21 personnel last week, which is 2 running backs. That's usually a halfback, a fullback, and a tight end. That's a very heavy run formation. And when I saw him out there, because this guy's a former receiver, now he's playing tight end. He has to grow into that frame, and he has to have strength and all those things. That was my worry with him, was that, man, he may be like Mark Andrews. He may be on the field for 40% of plays, maybe 60% of pass plays. The guy is out there. He looked good doing what he was doing. I don't know where you found that great information from, Drake, about him playing every single snap. And it wasn't in the first game, but this last game, because he was still a little dinged up, they tried to protect him. But in this last game,
I follow Warren Sharp on Twitter. That's where I stole it from.
Oh my gosh. Warren stole it from me. Whatever. Warren Sharp. I'm kidding. I love Warren Sharp. But anyway, the guy, he's out there. He's going to be he's definitely someone that should be going sooner. You can get him very late, very cheap. The other guy is TJ Hawkinson. Mm-hmm. He's going to be more like a Mark Andrews role, but he's going to see more pass. He's going to be on the field for a higher percentage of Detroit's passing plays than Mark Andrews will be for the Ravens. It's going to happen. The guy is playing pretty much every time they're in 11, meaning 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, and it's a true passing down. He's the guy out of there. He's the guy out there on the field 80% of those. He's also getting on the field in 12 personnel, right, which is 2 tight ends. So Hawkinson, I know he's a rookie. I know that doesn't usually happen, but this was Matt Waldman's highest graded tight end rookie, I believe, of all time. Wow. Since Waldman's been doing this like 12 years. So you pair that with what you've been hearing from camp, and now you're seeing this kind of thing come out in week 2, and even, in week 1, they got him out there a little and then got him off the field with the starters, which told us something. They don't want this guy hurt. He's going to be part of their offense. Hawkinson's a guy. Don't be surprised if he sneaks up in that 12, 15% target range for this offense. And if he does that at the price you're getting him at, he's a nice upside play, that you can get late, to pair another guy that you can pair with like a Kyle Rudolph or a Jimmy Graham or a Greg Olsen. You can get Hawkinson still pretty late.
The last guy we're going to talk about is a downgrade at the tight end position, and he's someone who's going as about tight end 5 or 6 off the board right now, and that's Eric Ebron. Everybody loved Eric Ebron because he scored 8,000 touchdowns last year. But if my man Jackie Doyle's back, got to watch out because Jack Doyle's the man. They love playing him there. He gets a ton of snaps. And if it's Jacoby Brissett in the game, forget about it.
Yeah, that's the main thing. It's Andrew Luck. The second biggest thing is Jack Doyle outsnapped Ebron. Now, when it came to being on the field for pass plays, Ebron was on the field for 1 more pass play than Jack Doyle, which is the main thing you care about. We dig several layers deeper, when we think about the way this stuff works. So from a snap perspective, Doyle's out there, but that still hurts Ebron because if they do check to a pass play when it's originally a run, now he's not out there to be the guy catching that little 4-yard crosser, right? It's Doyle. And so when you factor in touchdown regression, now he did make a great play in the end zone, a touchdown catch from Jacoby Brissett this past weekend. So he's still a red zone option, but you're just going to be so dependent on those touchdowns. It's going to be tough because now you mix in Paris Campbell, Devin Funchess, you've already got T.Y. Hilton, you got a lesser quarterback. There's more mouths to feed. And if Andrew Luck's hurt, you're going to have less efficiency. It's just a guy you just got to downgrade.
There you have it, folks. We hit you with another 90 minutes of content to get you ready for one of the biggest draft weekends of the year. Good luck to you guys out there this weekend. Dwain, final thoughts before we say goodbye.
No. If you are a subscriber to MattWaldmanRSP.com, you will get a nice newsletter in your mail tomorrow morning where there will be a couple of links to articles for subscribers only. One on Miles Sanders, Drake, and I do paths to value for Miles Sanders. So basically, if Drake wants to know what needs to break his way for Miles Sanders to pay off big, there's going to be an article that talks about that. And then there's also one on David Montgomery. So be sure to check that out if you're an RSP subscriber. If you're not following, either of us on Twitter, make sure you do so. I'll continue this next weekend to put out, this preseason content. I have several drafts, my home league dynasty type stuff this next week. So I'll try to do some of it earlier, for the games that happen early. Then the other games I may not get to until, next Monday, but I'll make sure to get that stuff out to you guys. And I appreciate it. Appreciate everybody. And like you said, Drake, all the love that we've been getting, and all the interaction that we're getting on Twitter. I just, I really appreciate it.
We love it. We are so thankful that you guys are spending some time with us. There's a lot of options out there in fantasy football. We're so happy that you choose us here at the Fantasy Football Hustle. I am Brian Drake of Fighting Chance Fantasy. He is Dwain McFarland of Football Guys. Good luck this weekend on your drafts. Stick to the tiers. Find some value. and you're going to take home a championship because you're hustling, baby. We'll see.
This has been the Fantasy Football Hustle. We're back next week with all you need for waiver wire, trades, roster management, and more. Until then, never get out hustled.